CJ.
Bonjour, I'm Rendel.
We are both grade 11 students in an international baccalaureate program at Leamington District Secondary School.
CJ and I are both part of our school eco team where we work with local partners like our Conservation Authority, Caldwell First Nation, and our municipality on climate action initiatives.
Leamington is known as the tomato capital of Canada, and our economy is based on agriculture. Local impacts of climate change include flooding, which has resulted in property loss and crop failure. Unlike previous generations, we seldom see snow and are rarely able to skate on ponds or the lake anymore.
We want to know more about climate change adaptation efforts related to land use planning that are being undertaken across Canada. But before we begin our interview, we would like to acknowledge that we are on land surrounded by water, originally inhabited by Indigenous peoples who have traveled this area since time immemorial. This territory is within the lands honored by the Wampum Treaties agreements between the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenni Lenape, and allied nations to peacefully share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Specifically, we would like to acknowledge the presence of the Three Fires Confederacy, including the Ojibwe, Odawa, Potawatomi, and Huron-Wendat peoples, and the Caldwell First Nations. We are dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture while remaining committed to moving forward respectfully with all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis.
Our interview will focus on the role of land use planning in Canada's adaptation to climate change. Joining us today, we have Dr. Sabine Dietz, who is Executive Director of CLIMAtlantic, Atlantic Canada's Climate Services Hub. Sabine also serves as a municipal councillor in Sackville, New Brunswick, and chair of the Board of Directors of Nature Canada.
I've been in sort of the field of adaptation for the last 12 years roughly now, and CLIMAtlantic was created out of a need to build capacity across Atlantic Canada to be more proactive and work more on adaptation. So meeting the impacts from climate change that we know are happening head on, basically.
We are also joined by Ross Dwyer, Manager of Research Partnerships at the University of Prince Edward Island. Ross also leads Prince Edward Island's Climate Sense initiative, which aims to develop climate adaptation expertise and leadership skills in Canada's future climate leaders.
As you say there, Climate Sense is a project that is essentially aiming to build adaptation capacity on the island, and particularly in young climate leaders. The program itself, Climate Sense, has two streams. It has a professional development stream, and then it has an internship stream. And that's really the one I focus on, I think, when we talk about creating young leaders. So these internship positions were year-long internships, and we had 19 of them here in the province, and they were placements with organizations all over the province.
So I'll admit that prior to this interview, I had never really given a ton of thought into how towns and cities are planned. And I hadn't considered that land use planners play such an important role in climate adaptation. Sabine, could you maybe provide a brief overview of the responsibilities of a land use planner and how they relate to climate change adaptation?
Yeah, and this is different from province to province. But wherever you live, there's spaces that are created for recreation. There are parks, the roads that are being planned. So in all of those things, usually planners are involved. And so when you think about a piece of forest in your community, there's a piece of nature, mental health issues, and I'll get back to that. And trees also play a massive role in taking up water. So a planner comes in and, for example, would say, okay, we've got this forest here, but somebody wants to develop it. What kind of impact will it have when I cut down the forest? Do we actually zone this forest as a natural area? Do I understand what kind of services? What does this forest, this little forest in the community, actually do to all the other things that are around it, including us? And so planners can lay out those areas that are really essential to keep us healthy, to keep others healthy, to keep our communities healthy, to allow for development in a safe way. So that's really sort of a very broad role that planners play.
Ross, where we live in southern Ontario, right on the shores of Lake Erie, we're feeling the impacts of climate change with rising lake levels, flooding, and erosion. This is causing property loss and crop failures. Those once-in-a-100-year storms are hitting us much more frequently. Right now in Leamington, in fact, we're at the beginning of what looks to be a blizzard. Yet over the past year, Canadians in British Columbia have endured a heat dome, extensive wildfires, and then torrential rains and mudslides. Ross, I'm wondering if you could tell us about the impacts of climate change on Atlantic Canada over the past few decades.
Sure, thanks very much, CJ. Yeah, it's a great question. To give you kind of an example about sort of climate change in our region, if we take a large storm with a heavy rainfall, so in New Brunswick, where Sabine is, that would have a lot of potential for inland flooding. Here in PEI, if we had that same rainfall, our concerns would be very different, right? We don't have an inland flooding problem given the nature of our province. But what we do have is we do have concerns about sort of aquifer recharges, right? We get all of our water from the ground, all our potable water. And so we don't want to lose that runoff and that flooding water to the straits as well. And so, climate change means we are going to have to adapt in different provinces differently on how these go. Particularly in PEI, though, yeah, we get a lot of attention on coastal erosion, for sure. I mean, we're a small little sandbank, basically, highly erodible sandstone, and we lose a lot of our land every year. It can be anywhere up to 6 feet from certain areas.
Sabine, we understand that you do have a background in developing nature-based solutions to climate change that not only help us to adapt to climate change, but also to mitigate or lessen our contributions to climate change. Could you maybe describe a climate adaptation project you've been involved with?
I'm really passionate about that piece in adaptation because I have a background in biology and ecology. I'm a botanist. I think it's really important to understand that adaptation crosses all aspects from, health to biology to, it really crosses everything because we need to adapt on all levels. So plants are really important. And so the more plants you have, the more soil you have, the more greenhouse gas emissions are not going into the atmosphere. It picks up CO2 from the atmosphere and it slows down water. And so, when we think about adaptation using natural solutions, the straightforward way right now that people are looking at it is by building ponds that retain stormwater, that runoff water in the communities. So, this idea of, you don't just want to build a concrete hole where the water goes. You actually want to do something else with it. So it is a wetland. It's a created wetland where water is stored, but it also supports accumulation of soil, meaning you capture greenhouse gas emissions in the soil as it builds up. And it provides habitat for species and ecosystems. And on top of that, it's a space that is in downtown Sackville, meaning that people who would normally drive somewhere to go for a walk can go for a walk around that pond. These natural solutions are a really nice and overlapping area where you can put in all various kind of experiences from health, social, economics, recreation, and biology. It's a really nice connection maker.
In Canada and around the world, Indigenous communities are often disproportionately impacted by climate change and often lack the infrastructure to lead healthy lives. Ross, how should municipalities ensure that marginalized communities are considered in climate change adaptation planning?
Thanks, CJ. I think it's a really important question, a really big question. And first and foremost, I am not a member of an Indigenous community. I do work in the Indigenous community here on the island and with Indigenous scholars on climate projects. How we approach climate change and adaptation within municipalities and communities with low income and Indigenous families also leads to a lot of social justice issues and a lot of social justice questions. There's land rights issues and land right questions. If you don't have access to your land, how do you perform those adaptation pieces on your property or your area? A lot of their food is coming from carbon-intensive processed foods that are transported thousands and thousands of miles, right? And so I think having access to areas to grow food, to access to fresh food, and getting rid of these sort of food deserts that generally surround in a lot of Indigenous communities because of the issues of land and rights is a big issue that we can address. And I think most importantly is just being included in the conversation. Municipalities need to make sure that those power dynamics are addressed and that Indigenous community members, people with low income and marginalized communities, BIPOC communities, are included in planning. The need for accredited planners is huge. One thing to remember about planning is you don't have to take one of those official planning degrees, right? You don't have to go to one of the 15 schools that provides official planning, qualifications. You can go and do geography. You can go and do, a different scientific course and then lead your way into planning and land use planning. But my suggestion would be, rural small communities need planners.
No matter what career you're going to embark on once you're out of high school, the reality is that climate change is going to underlie and sort of shape what you're going to do in the future. And I'm looking forward to also having more youth come out and influence the decision makers that are currently making the wrong decisions to making better decisions. So look forward to having more of you. Tell us what to do, please.
Thank you both so much for sharing your expertise and personal experiences with us. It's obvious that land use planning will continue to play a crucial role in climate change, and we hope young Canadians in our audience will consider this as a rewarding and important future career.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.